Hey everybody, episode 31, two FMA-Nerds talk about stuff. Brought on my buddy James Arthur Shepard Jr. I met him amongst many other people down at Datu Kelly Warden's Water and Steel camp. And yeah, we decided to bring him on and have a fun conversation. His full lengthy bio of the wide variety of stuff that he does is in the description below. A couple of key things is go check out his YouTube channel. So go subscribe. And go check out his Facebook page, which is right there. Anyways, I'm going to let him tell his story. We got to talk about some really cool stuff involving modalities of learning, particular to having a background and a professional background in behavioral health and mental health. So amongst being a very talented martial arts practitioner and instructor, he's also a professional licensed behavioral health specialist, which is great because mental health conversations are what I'm here for. So anyways, enjoy the episode. We'll get right into it. What's up, James?
Hey,
brother. So, before we go back to our previous conversation, let's tell a story. Who are you? What do you do? And what brings you here today, my friend?
All right. So I was born into bedlam and squalor, but so no, I that's a good old Tom Waits quote. But yeah, so I got started in martial arts way back in 2007. My first start was Hapkido. I learned from some Koreans in south side of Chicago, Kwan Si Kyun's Hapkido schools. He was one of the early Hapkido like high-ranking guys to make it to the States back in the late 60s, early 70s. And started there. I actually met them when I was like a kid because a friend of the family did it. And my parents were like, "You're going to get hurt. Don't be like Karate Kid, so don't do martial arts." And as soon as I got to be a legal adult, that was the first thing I did. So, I got into that, and I did that in the summers when I was back home from undergrad. I trained there all summer and then went back to school and basically trained whatever I learned until I got back there. And then when I got to Indiana for graduate school, I was doing my master's in counseling education, psychology. I hooked up with the Indiana University Hapkido Club and the local Hapkido community here, which is also pretty like old and storied as well. The guys who brought TKD and Hapkido here, Mugili and Kidukli, really kind of got Taekwondo going in the area. And then where I got into FMA was my Hapkido here was very eclectic. It's a United States Hapkido Federation, and we're pretty much like, if it works, it's good Hapkido. So we beg, borrow, and steal. It's when I talked to Datu Kelly, and he's like, "Man, do you guys steal like stuff from everybody?" I'm like, "Yeah, but at least we say where we got it from." But there was a huge FMA influence on just the way we dealt with weapon defense and just our ideas on weapon use. And so that got me into the local modern art East community. And so I connected with some of the local guys here, Jason Gearhart, who's one of Chuck Goss's top guys in the area, was my first introduction formally to like an FMA class. And it was just a different way of moving and a different intent. And I'll save the Arnis jokes for a little bit later, but just one where it was just something different, and I loved it. And it was one where a couple of years later, I was almost at my black belt in Hapkido, and I met my NSI instructor, Ryan Massett, who's one of the seniors under Datu Kelly Worden. And it was funny because when what got me going under him wasn't like, "Oh, cool class, like let me see what you're doing." I just finished my provisional black belt test in Hapkido, and there was some knife defense, and I did it, and he's like, hey, that was a good test, but do you want to learn how to really use the stuff? And I'm just like, what? He's like, yeah, come to class, like the next one right now. And I'm like, okay. And then he proceeded to just take my lunch, like the whole class. It was great. He's a great guy. He has this kind of just air about him where like he's a very straight shooter. It'll tell you how he feels off the get-go, but like it was hard not to drink the Kool-Aid. And so he's one who got me into NSI, and that was about 2012, 2013. And so I started running with the NSI crew and doing that, pretty heavily. And then it was in 2016, we literally were just like studying stuff that we found online of just like, hey, this is cool, like let's check it out more. And then we kind of just had some things aligned where we got hooked up with Ramel Tortle, PTK. He was passing through the area on the way to another school down south in I think Evansville or Vincennes to do a seminar, and we said like, hey, like how do we get your system? Like, we want to go to the bucket, the well, not the bucket. So we're like, you're close by and have people in the area. Like, what do we do? And we literally met at a Wendy's on like short notice and like, had just a very honest, like frank discussion about what we wanted to do. And he's like, what are you doing tonight? And I'm like, well, nothing now. And he's like, come to the seminar. And like, I wasn't able to make that one because I had to work, but he's like, what are you doing Friday? And I'm like, nothing now. And he's like, come to the seminar. And then like we did that, and he's like, what are you doing Saturday? Come to the seminar. So we went to like Evansville, Vincennes, and Kentucky in like the span of a week. And then I think it was at close to Louisville. And then like after the Louisville seminar in Kentucky, we just spent like, I spent 2 days with him. Ryan and Levi, Minnick was another guy who got it off the ground here too, and also did NSI. They went to the other one earlier in the week. And he's like, when is your next class? And we're like, Monday. And he's like, I will be there. And we like literally everybody we put in the area of just like, guys, 2 on Mel is going to be doing stuff in our class. Come give us an audience. And we found a bunch of people and got them like a seminar audience. And then that kind of got the PTK group started here. And we went strong for several years. The pandemic kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in things, but we're still, cool with them and, talk and, support, the stuff with that. Had some times to get to see 2 on Jared Hongi in person, get some stuff, and seen 2 on Leslie and 2 on Hanoi several times and gotten awesome training from them. But yeah, so like it's that as far as like the DNA with FMA, like those 2 are like probably my biggest influences. In addition to, one of my instructors in Hapkido also was a very long-time Inasano practitioner as well. And that's probably one of the bigger ones in the state outside of Modern Arnis and the couple of PTK groups that are there. Those are kind of the 3 that really sort of have the anchor here. And so, also got, kind of familiar with the Inasano Lacoste system. And then, as far as teaching goes, I became an apprentice instructor in 2017 and a full instructor in 2019. And I'm currently a full instructor level 3 under Datu Kelly, and I'm studying Balintawak as well under Belton Lubas. And, 3rd degree in United States Hapkido Federation, 2nd degree in Jidokwan Tae Kwon Do under United Federation Taekwondo instructors. Just dabbled in other things, kickboxing, Brazilian Jiujitsu, JKD Grappling Association. Like I just like to learn, if it's movement and doing martial stuff, I enjoy it. Like I see stuff. Had sometimes doing judo stuff too. It's just all fun. Like I just like learning how the body moves different ways and different ways to apply it.
I mean, that's a short history, but what's interesting, because we were talking about beforehand, is Taekwondo ends up being like the primary vehicle that people get into martial arts, especially of a certain age generation. Because because I'm assuming you're approaching 40 like I am, yeah?
I'll be 36 in October.
Okay, so close enough.
Getting there. Close enough. I'm gray enough to be 40, but I'm not quite chronologically there.
Well, close enough, because like the fact is Taekwondo was really prominent in the 90s and really hit prominence in the 2000s. But you and I are both the generation that remembered like the full contact coming out of the 80s like open karate tournaments, but leading into more of the pre-Olympic style, then going to like the semi-Olympic U style, and then the point sparring. And it's really interesting that it's a common thing I'm finding. Like majority of people get into FMA by way of like a Taekwondo school because it just happens to be there. And it's interesting that because of Modern Arnis is so prominent as a lot of these as guests in a lot of these schools, there is like the direct application from Taekwondo or Hapkido leading into some form of FMA. It's a common theme across the board, and it's very prevalent here in the US, which is also fascinating. So going back a little bit, like what got you what got you into martial arts in general?
Oh, freaking Power Rangers. I am completely honest. It was like watching Power Rangers. I'm just like, it was that. And it was I always butcher the title, but it was the like, kind of like World Masters of like martial arts. Like, this like kind of like competition show that was more like just like, it was like WWE for martial arts. Kind of.
Was it the one with Ernie Reyes Jr. being the host for it?
Maybe it had a couple really so like Willie the Bam was in it, and a couple other guys who were like young at this point were like doing it, like they were like getting their careers off the bat, but they like that was kind of a platform, was like playing a character in this like, you know, pretend show. And I just remember thinking it was the coolest thing, seeing all these different martial arts styles and different things they emphasized, and you know, all the, you know, competition things they would do in demonstrations. And I'm just like, I want to do that. And my parents were like very kind of, you know, overprotective in a lot of ways, because my sister, you know, is intellectual disability and cerebral palsy, and like I'm autistic, and I had 2 left feet for most of my child life until I found things that were kind of gelled with sensory stuff. And so it was really weird, because like if you ask me to play a ball sport, soccer as a keeper, I get. Any other ball sport, I look like I like, have they seen this sport before? Do they know which direction the ball is supposed to go? But for some reason, martial arts just clicked. And I don't know. I think it's just because it's all you in a lot of sense, and you're not like making a thing do a thing. And when you're with someone else, you're connected in a way with certain structures and geometry and patterns that like, I feel like there's a lot of deduction in it. And so that just kind of clicked as well, because I'm a very like deductive reasoner. And so like it was one where like I had this, you know, want to get into it from probably like 4, 5, 6 years old. And one of my good family friends at the time was a black belt in Hapkido at the school that I would eventually train at when I was an adult. And you know, I really wanted to get into it once I actually saw it in person. And they were like, no, you're going to get hurt. Like, you know, people get hurt in tournaments and, you know, whatnot. And I'm just like, you know, being the stubborn self that I am, was I waited until the opportunity arose. So once I got out of the house, that was like the first thing that I did, paid my own way, and you know, just kind of evolved from there. Like I just kept wanting to learn and kept doing it. And you know, I think what was really fortunate was a lot of my, you know, instructors at that time, you know, they were all solid black belts and, you know, practitioners. And, you know, it was one where, you know, they kind of did it, you know, instilled in me the, like, you know, you don't want to just wear the rank, you want to be the rank. Because I mean, you know, how many people see the, you know, not knocking people's time in and their work, but, you know, the 12, 13-year-old black belt that got it for attending classes and being good in class, and, you know, doesn't know how the things really fall. And it's one where, I mean, not that you can't do that. I mean, there was a tournament up in Indy a couple of weeks, like 2 weeks ago. It was during one of the next, I think the Black Expo. They had a boxing exhibition tournament that was kids. And there were 4-year-olds and they're banging. And I'm just like, you know, that's kind of cool. Like, you know, it's, you know, you can do it. You know, boxers come up and Thai fighters, they come up young. And, you know, it's one where I'm like, you know, for me, there's no reason why younger martial artists can't get quality education and fundamentals, maybe don't teach them how to do a flying neck breaker or something like that, but they can get good skills and learn the respect and responsibility of it, and the self-control, and as they get older they can really get into the real and kind of have that I'd say the weight on them of knowledge. It's one where it's not just having it, but like it's a weight of like restraint and knowing are you doing this to go like punk the bully at 5 o'clock or 3 o'clock, or are you going to go and know like, all right, this is for preservation and protection, and just I think that's the big thing. So for me, like kind of getting to get it off the ground as an adult, it was just a different kind of learning experience. And I tell my students, it's all about being okay learning to make mistakes and try things out. And I tell them I make the most mistakes out of everybody there, just because my first day of Hapkido, I fell down super hard trying to do a back spin kick. Someone said, you know how to do a roundhouse? And me being, ignorant was like, yeah, I think it's this, and tried to do a back spin kick, and my leg spun out from under me, and I like totally landed flat on my butt, and I'm like, I do not know how to do a roundhouse. Please show me.
But the fact is, like, the perseverance after failure, because like there is the cliche that a black belt is the white belt who kept failing but just keeps on doing it over time. So there's a lot of power to it. And what's interesting is, of all the things to rebel against after you've left the house, I mean, you went into martial arts full hand, and a lot of people like you rebel and go the other way, but like martial arts, that's a new one for me. I haven't heard that as like, I'm rebellious adult now, I'm going to go do martial arts because me. That's awesome.
I mean, I won't say that I didn't do my share of dumb stuff when I was in my late teens and early 20s, but like I was pretty much a good kid, my whole upbringing, just growing up I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and saw lots of crazy stuff, and I'm just like, man, like it was funny because just in the when I was in high school, I was in a bit better area, and I went to a pretty decent kind of college prep school, but when I was in grade school, and my to give an example, my first grade school I went to only went up to 6th grade because they had to get rid of the 7th and 8th grade because the gang problem was so bad. They needed to not have the older kids there because they were getting into too many fights and causing too many gang issues with initiation because they recruit that young. And even then, like the 6th graders still were getting into it. They just weren't into it as hard as the 7th and 8th graders, because kind of by that like preteen high school age, that's when someone's physically capable enough to really do something. And it was just that reality. And we'd get out of school late some days because the gangs were shooting outside the school, and so like we'd be sitting there waiting for dismissal and be like, all right, the gunshot's done. It's been quiet for like 15 minutes. Okay, let's go out. And then just the even in the mornings, like I was telling a friend of mine this, and he just couldn't believe it. Even in like early grade school up through, there was this the spot in front of the school. So like what was funny about the school was, if you look at it now, this school's been around for probably 40 some odd years, close to 50, and you cannot find pictures of the actual building other than the front of the building that's like, since I've been there, kind of been a nicer facade than what it used to be. And they took down the fences around the grass, because there used to be like chain link fencing around the grass to keep people off the grass. All the windows were opaque, shatter resistant plastic. There were no clear windows, so you didn't get proper daylight in the school. That was to keep people from viewing inside, to not steal the stuff inside. But there were, anyway, the grass had fences around it, and the interesting thing was there was one fence that just didn't lock the same as the others, and that was called the cage. And so if you had beef with somebody, you went into the cage and you handled your business. But the problem is if you went in and someone had something with you, they were jumping in after you, and then someone else would be like, well, now's my opportunity while they're distracted. So it was a vicious cycle. So like if you went in, you were taking the chance to get back at whatever somebody did to you, but you were also taking the chance that everybody else could do the same thing to you. And this went on before classes started in the morning until the teachers came out to break it up. And it was just a known thing. It was like, you got something to do, go into the cage, get it out of your system, go to class, have your normal day. And it was just, that was life. And Yeah, it was just a different reality. So like taking that to, kind of how that shaped going up and going into martial arts, like it was a, kind of self-defense as part of like the survival thing.
Mhm.
And, just also, being in Chicago, like, there's the way the weapons laws were, you just kind of had to rely on your hands unless you're willing to go to jail.
Yeah.
So, I was ready to get out of there as quick as possible when I got to, grad school, and just ended up staying in Indiana, in Bloomington. But, yeah, it was just like, that was my thing, was like, this is the thing that I was, passionate about and interested in, held my interest. And, it was just kind of a special interest. I've got a couple things like that. And I joke that, psychology, martial arts, and photography were all special interests that I could monetize.
Yeah.
So, not every autistic person gets to monetize their special interest, but some of us are lucky enough to be able to be like, I can info dump and learn about this all day and not get in trouble, or actually make money off of this. So I'll do that.
Awesome. So it's interesting, the idea of getting out of the hood and out of the trailer park because you're being conditioned to violence, and you're seeing that because it's a lived-in experience. Because when I was talking to Marquise about this, because of course he grew up in Chicago as well.
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, it's this thing about being conditioned to violence, and this is the living experience. Because you find out with like some martial artists, the soccer mom, suburbia martial artists, where it's an after school program where they actually don't have any actual stake in the game, where they actually have to learn this stuff for the dealing with reality, because they're dealing with it in the street, they're dealing with it within their own culture. There's conditions of violence that does not inform their sense of reality. But having grown up in some of those in that culture, it is interesting and something to celebrate when somebody realizes get out of that vicious cycle of violence, hate, and toxicity, and actually move on, move out, and become something better, and then create a better generation. Because like in my case, I was conditioned with violence because of the military and growing up in poverty, and then like I did some hood rat gang related stuff when I was living in LA. So it's just, it's one of those things that occurs, but that's like such a specific social culture. Yeah, I'm butchering it, but it's a social economic culture that people get so they get stuck in sometimes. And when people can get out of it, it's really interesting and fascinating to hear those stories, because again, you were around it, you were in it, and it's amazing that you got out of it, because we all know the statistics of the inner city.
Oh yeah, I was so happy when I got to be 25, because I'm like, dang, I beat another statistic. So yeah, it was funny, because there's a running joke going on, was just like, dude, just make it to 25, make it to 25. You know, your life expectancy goes drastically up as a black male. So if you're not incarcerated, or not in a gang, and not in a rough area, and like you make it past that age, your likelihood of going downhill is a lot less. So
yeah, highly educated, successful businessman, out of the hood. I mean, you're set. That's awesome. And that is a story that often gets forgotten about in the whole martial arts journey. Because I saw a post here recently with Paulo, and I've been kind of holding off on it, but he was talking about the underrepresentation of Black Filipino martial arts practitioners.
Ooh, that was a good one. I don't know if I commented on that one or not. I was sitting on it for a minute too, and I was like, do I jump in, or do I wait and watch the thing burn a little bit? And it's just one where I think there's a lot in just especially being in I'm in Korean arts, I'm in Filipino arts, and it's one where just looking at even just the local kind of demographic. I mean, Bloomington's a very diverse city because of the university, and I mean, the martial arts is still pretty 80-90% Caucasian, and like maybe something else thrown in every now and then. And usually I'm the only Black person in the room. I might have like an Asian person, or Hispanic person, every now and then, but like I am, I've traveled all over the country, and been to lots of seminars and camps and stuff like that. And I think the only place where, this is funny, the only place where I saw that not as much a thing was in and I mean, most everywhere I've gone, it's been very receptive and open. Like I've never really encountered anything that seemed openly discriminatory or anything like that. But I will say the Balintawak community was different. Because when I went to World Camp last, there were several Black FQIs and other just people studying and people of different levels. And like, it was just funny because like, I think by the second or third day of camp, all of us were just like, I'm just like, this is cool. And then the other OGs were like, man, I've never seen this many brothers at camp at once. Like, it got to a point where like, I think it might have been Guru Daniel who was like, can we get a picture with everybody with the PM body? Because this doesn't happen. And because it was like him and Maurice and a couple other guys were just like, we need to like document this. And I'm just like, that's kind of cool. Because it was just something that just hadn't been a thing or just, to that level at that point. But like that was the most I'd seen in one room ever. And it wasn't like a tiny number. It was like, probably double digits, if I remember right. I could be off, but it was enough. It was not enough. It was a noticeable difference than like, almost every single other one I went to where it was like less than 5.
What's interesting
all the time.
Because what's interesting in dealing with Black people in martial arts, where you see it is, again, the Black exploitation films back in the 70s, you see Kung Fu. I mean, Wu-Tang.
Yeah.
Straight up. So you see the Black community represented in Kung Fu. And then obviously boxing, combat sports, specifically boxing, because when I was coming up in boxing, especially in Olympic level or Olympic style boxing, it was always the kids from the inner city. It was always
it was dominant.
It was the Black, Mexican, and Filipinos that are in the fight gyms. But for some reason, I very rarely saw them in the Taekwondo schools and Filipino martial arts, because I can name off like Maurice Crump is a prominent Filipino martial artist underneath the Santo lineage, and Kenny Bigby with PTK, and
of course, Kenny's 45 minutes from me.
And then you got like Jolie Brown. I mean, it's actually in the PTK communities where I see
that's a little bit more. And I mean, you've got in our niche, you've got Tom Bolden is another one too, if you're familiar with him. And there's a couple other guys, but it's really like I said, it's not as common, especially at I feel like in the instructor ranks. Like it's like you might see a handful at the student ranks, you rarely see instructors. And I feel like down south, I mean, you've got dang it, he's in Manala, PTK. God, I should know this because Rich Howe. Because I'm like, why did I blank on a Rich name? I spent hours with the man, like, But Rich, you got Rich and Ross and some other guys who are solid practitioners, and Rich has a solid program down in Florida and is producing good good instructors too, and there's that, and I feel like again what you said, PTK I think also has a great diversity to it. It's really good. And they've always been very open. I mean, I've played with several different of the PTK circles and the menagerie of cliques that go on, but it's one where it's always been generally welcoming. So I think that's that's a good sign. It's just one where I think for our niece, it's just one where I feel like maybe in the older days it might have been a little bit different, but I feel like as far as what I could speak for the Midwest, I've seen a lot more on the PTK or an Asano side than I have in the modern Chinese side, particularly. I said I was going to name names earlier, but I've seen in one federation it's pretty. I can maybe name one other one that associates in that crew, but it's just one where it's just not as common. And then in NSI, like we obviously got more, but because Marquise is in Chicago, and then we've got other people who've been in and out, and you've got several of the other instructors who've been in and out over the years. So it's really kind of it's always been kind of who can show up and show what they know and back it up, which is great, because it's not like just who and how many years you've been doing this and how much money have you paid me at seminars kind of deal. So that's there's a certain integrity to it, just in the quality of the character of the people that are getting these things going. And it attracts a certain individual. And I
Yeah.
wish there were more. I wish there was more diversity, just with the just the raw athletic talent that I see amongst other sports and other groups. Where I'm just
Football.
like, man, like if FMA could get a fraction of that, like, my God, that would be something. I talk about it all the time with the U.S. soccer team, where I'm just like, can we like figure something out? But
You
yeah,
want to see masters of footwork? I mean, football players and basketball players.
mhm.
I mean, look at the raw athleticism from that, and talk about the crossover and that capability of putting into context between
Yeah.
sport and martial practice. And I think actually we were talking about it before is this issue about like cultural conditioning, because the cultural conditioning of getting out of a certain level of poverty is using sport to get out of the hood and out of the trailer park. And so there's a cultural conditioning of go to college, go to the NFL, go to the NBA, go through the WBC, become a pro Olympic boxer or a pro boxer. Those are the avenues that are culturally accepted. And
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, martial arts is not a money-making racket. It is I mean, it can be.
If you want to make a small fortune, start with a large fortune.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with that, like trying to make money off of martial arts and coming out of certain economic settings, it's really hard to look at, because the investment and the time alone and for the little outcome is daunting, versus like I could go do a bunch of smokers and get picked up on a pro ticket as a boxer, or I can work my way through high school to college and get picked up with the pros with football and basketball. That seems a lot more advantageous. And also like socially, it's conditioned within our education system, because martial arts is not part of our education system until you get to like the collegiate level, which is interesting.
Yeah, and it's funny because in IU, up until recently, pretty much like after the pandemic, that kind of threw a wrench in a lot of stuff. But for the longest time, IU was the largest martial arts program outside of the military academy. And it was funny because one of the guy who did the tactics for West Point, Jason Winkle, he was from IU. Like he got his start here. Not so much a start, but like he really I think launched off professionally here. He's from a different place, but Jason's a wealth of knowledge, and spent a lot of time within Asano, and getting good work under him and Larry Hartzell. And he did he was the West Point combatives director, and it's funny because IU was the largest program outside of that. And I remember when I got here, it was still in its heyday, and that was in 2010, and it was just like, man, like it's not just like the couple like big 3 arts, kind of like you have like Taekwondo, BJJ, judo, stuff like that, things that had a long established tradition. But you had like some, I don't want to say obscure, but just like stuff that just wasn't as commercially available in other places. Because you had people like when you're doing martial arts demos, there'd be like Sanshao tournaments, and you had the different styles of karate, and you had just different things that were available, and a lot of the people cross-trained, which was really cool. Like there was a very diverse background, because it'd be funny, you'd be rolling with the BJJ black belt, and they're like, oh yeah, like I also have done Asano stuff for a long time. You'd be doing Hapkido with someone, and they're like, oh yeah, I also do Arnis. Or you'd be doing Taekwondo, and they're like, oh, I'm also a black belt in Hapkido. Hapkido and Taekwondo are very closely related, but that's like saying I'm from Indiana and you're from Illinois. But I always joke that Hapkido is applied Taekwondo in a lot of ways. But unless you apply your Taekwondo, then they look really similar. But just development of that, the collegiate atmosphere also can really be a big one, especially for me it was, of like exposure to just more of what's out there from a recreational standpoint. But from a commercial standpoint, there's really not that professional level that really shows prominence and wealth and things like that, aside of like kind of going the McDojo route, and that's kind of hard to break into at this point because there's so much bad press around it, and who wants to have that reputation? So that's one where I think the draw in the university environment's really big, but also just I think from thinking from a community standpoint, the school that I started with in Chicago, it was on like 79th and Halsted or something like that. Not a good it wasn't Halstead. It was 79th and maybe it was Kedzie. Not a good area. Not a good area. That's not too far away from Midway Airport, and just pretty rough stuff. I used to live not too far away from there when I was a young kid, and we moved a little bit further south out of that kind of element. But growing up, like it was one where just even getting to the school was dangerous kind of deal. And there was a solid, that school's been around since the early 70s. And, I think the big draw for that school was the grandmaster there, Kwan Do Kyun, taught the Chicago PD for many years. And so he had that cred to draw on people going like, oh, that karate stuff don't work. You need to box, or you just, cap somebody or do that. And it's like, he was, the real deal. And, they're like, oh, this stuff works. Okay. And, he got, they had lots of black belts. And I mean, it was predominantly, black people and, maybe a handful, some, Hispanic, we got a high, in that area, there's a high Mexican, Puerto Rican, population as well. And, that in that environment, it was good. And there's also a North Side school, and the North Side school was kind of like the flagship. Like they kind of had a little bit of a chip on our shoulder, but like we all knew the South Side school knew how to bang. So, we're like the North Siders could have the nice looking school and the fun promo video and all that. We know, like, we actually know how to fight down here. That's kind of the thing. Not knocking the North Siders. There were some cool people up there too, but like the South Siders were like, okay, we don't need all that fancy stuff. We're just here to learn how to do stuff, do the thing. So
the thing, so like what's interesting about like the different styles, I mean, this is an FMA show, but it really isn't. But what's interesting about the different styles of Taekwondo, for like mine, one of the systems that I was under is the American Kickboxing Federation.
Really?
Yeah.
I have a very good friend, a fraternity brother who's a Kickboxing black belt.
Yeah, so that's actually how I got connected with, or got into context with Filipino martial arts, because my first Filipino martial arts instructor was a Modern Arnis and Dosi Pares guest instructor in the school, and so that's how I got that connection. But what's interesting with hybridization, it's the hybridization of Hapkido and Taekwondo. But more so, it's talked about like being able to fight. The best like fighter specific Taekwondo school I was part of was this in the bottom of the basement of a Christian Vietnamese church, and all these Vietnamese kids could fight because one, they came straight from the refugee camp, so they actually had the conditions of violence,
real life experience,
the real world life experience. So. And when I was training with them, it was just a straight smoke session and get my ass kicked. And then when we would go to tournaments before I trained with them, again, it was just a smoke session and get my ass kicked. Because one, they had that cultural lived-in necessity, and they put it in the context. Plus, there was the reasons why behind it that matched with their intent and purpose. So it's just it's fascinating between, like, I've been to some like Olympic level schools, and they're great sport fighters, but people who actually needed the fight. It is fascinating that these small little clandestine schools breed some of the strongest fighters and some of the more like stronger people, both emotionally, mentally, spiritually, to a point. And it's fascinating to see like that dichotomy.
I mean, just personally, like the meanest TKD people I've seen, and even just by kind of word of mouth talking to other people, because I remember talking to Dan Anderson one day, and he was like, man, those Texans, there's something about those Texas guys. And I'm just like, I know what you're talking about. And then like, talking to my, one of my, good friends, who's part of the same lineage, trained under the Koreans that brought TKD and Hapkido to Bloomington. There's a handful of schools in Indy, and then there's some people from some offshoots parts of the state that aren't urban at all, that are kind of like my school, where we're like, I'm in a basement of a church, we're renting out a renovated garage basically. And it just gives us, it's like 800 square feet of space, which is nice, but, it gives us, with the classes and the number of people we have, it works out. But, it's just funny how, like, it's those groups are the ones you have to watch out for, because a lot of the fancy, nice schools, they're nice, and they have good programs. They're definitely pulling in the numbers, but like, if you look for like the fighters, they're coming from the not so glitzy looking spots. So
it's that Fight House versus Academy.
Yeah. Because some of the ones, like I can think this guy I'm talking about, like he teaches out of a park district, and like dude was a national level competitor like back in the day, and back in like the 70s and 80s, and so it's one where
they were straight up beating the shit out of each other.
Yeah, and I mean, old man can still hit. I trained with him plenty, and it's one where it's like he. It's funny because he's like, yeah, my knees aren't where they seem to be, and I'm dealing with this, and I'm just like, you can move when you want to, kind of thing, and whatnot, and and the nice thing is he still can pass down the information. So like even things that maybe aren't as easy to do, like he knows how to tell you how to do it, so like the information's not lost. But yeah, it's just I think just training with a different intent is a big thing. Because I tell my students, FMA, Korean stuff, like the thing that I want them to leave with, other than just the skills and good fundamentals, is like I want you to be able to use what you're learning. Because if I teach you something, if you leave here without something that you can better apply at the end of the day that might help you out in real, I failed. I didn't do my job. If I just told you something that was like, good job, Skippy, doing that kick that probably is going to get you taken down in real life. Like, there's some things you do for athletic purpose, but it's like, okay, if you learn how to throw some more power into something or get better alignment or, hit harder or move better, that's all functional. And, there's lots of ways of disguising repetition and efficacy and, just different drills and play and whatnot. And, just so people don't get bored. And it's one where, I think, especially coming from, my first start being very self-defensive, because that's Hapkido's big thing, is, and, FMA, I'm just like, we're at the point where we're using force at that point. It's like we have a weapon, like force escalation has already went up a few levels. So like, you better be practicing with intent, and kind of realism in mind. And, you better be moving your feet. So, I've been holding it in, but my FMA joke for the day is, how do you beat an Ernest guy?
How do you?
Move your foot. But how do you beat a PTK guy?
Don't move your feet.
Step on their foot.
Step on. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's just funny. That's just my self-hating humor.
Well, I mean,
but it's just like you got that, back into the realism part, like you've got that element where, as we practice these different modalities, different arts have different strategies and tactics, everybody knows an angle one, but like, our knees are playing medium to corto, that medium to short range, your angle one's going to look different than a PTK angle one, where you're playing Largo at first and trying to keep it Largo until you're going in for the kill. So, that just totally shapes your strategies and whatnot. But like, it's fun getting to play with people of other, backgrounds and designs and whatnot to see like, okay, there's more than one way to do this angle one,
Yeah. Well, that, and also like putting into context, because here the other part about being a dojo rat, or just a gym rat, you have ideal conditions, and this is that balance between nice academy versus realism of you got to go out to the parking lot, you got to go out to the park, got to go play in the rain, versus just being on the mat, being in the cage, being in the ring, where it's very sanitized versus the reality of what you're doing, because putting it into the environment, the new environmental context, changes your approach to it. Because like up here in Alaska, I mean, we're winter like 9 months out of the year.
It's dark up there.
I'm not doing dynamic footwork, kicking or otherwise, so I have to be very subtle in my base movement, and be able to hold my ground.
Hey, cat, put you in the door. Sorry, kitten's being a hellion, but yeah, that's a big point, and it's just one where just especially your conditions. I mean, God, in Indiana, it's hot and humid, so like you can do all that moving around, but you're going to be gassed in 10 minutes because they're breathing in water all the time,
trying to hold on that stick and it flings out of your hand.
And Indiana's like now pretty much a constitutional carry state, so like they might just shoot you. So
Alaska's a constitutional carry state, so it's like
it used to be a permit state, and then a handful of years ago they're just like, screw it. So I'm like, oh, whatever. But and for me too, I think coming up, kind of more background, I didn't talk about it earlier, but most of my real world experience was before I started teaching, because I had growing up in Chicago, and I had stuff in college, just kind of being I went to Monmouth in the middle of nowhere, Illinois, And so, I mean, there was nothing but cornfields and booze was around. But, it's just one where, just the, I mean, my fraternity in particular was like at the time, the national leader in risk management for the international fraternity. So, as far as like how to surveil a room and, conflict resolution, and if, stuff goes down, like how do we handle this individually and as a team? And it was a thing. And then when I got to Bloomington, I was in grad school. I mean, grad school, you're in class half the day, and sometimes it's evening, sometimes it's morning. So usually you worked odd retail hour jobs, or you worked bar or night jobs. And so I worked security at 2 different music venues for a couple of years. And I've bodyguarded some household names. Like I've bodyguarded Andrew Luck, Family Man Barrett from the Whalers. A couple other, big names, just, is like the guy of like, make sure something doesn't happen to him. Mind you, not a whole lot would ever happen here, but, when you're pulling in national acts every other weekend, it's a different element. And, it's different when you've got like the hippie nights where people just spun out on Molly versus the country nights where, literally at 12:30, every single
whiskey and cigarettes. Here we go.
Every single freaking country concert that was of any like critical mass, midnight was the worst time of night. So rap concerts, it was always 2:30.
Yep.
It was always 2:30 at rap concerts. And if it was country concerts, which was like more likely what was going to come through because of the area demographic, because you get people pulled in from the surrounding counties, the country concerts from midnight till 12:30 was just a nonstop fight. It was, they get hopped up on country and whiskey, and then you be throwing people out. And then after about a half hour between everybody thrown out and people seeing people get thrown out, everybody would just be like, you know what? We don't want any. We're just going to enjoy the rest of the show. It was a small to medium-sized club, so it was one where like when something broke out, like you kind of saw it if it was going on, and we would always signal with torches, whatnot when we were something was happening, to let another door or another post like see like come here now, and so all kinds of fun stuff with that, and just doing all of that before I was officially instructing anything just gave me a different sense of how to practice, because I mean it was one where like I was coming through the ranks having to use the stuff, so
perspective and purpose behind it, which again this goes into I constantly bring this up in the podcast because it is the foundation of my belief system when it comes to martial arts. Is what is your why, and your why changes throughout time based on what you're wanting to do, what you're trying to become, your life circumstance, but that also informs your way that you teach, predicated based upon your life's experiences. Because the dynamic we run into is like when you put somebody who comes from an affluent background, they go in law enforcement, and you throw them in the hood, that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Versus you have someone who grew up in the hood, grew up in the trailer park, who knew how to rough and tumble, then you put them in these situations where they know how to deal with this and they have that resiliency, but they lack the education to do it. They go back to base circumstance of their upbringing. Then you have the third part where they have the experience, have the education, have the resiliency, and they can apply it accordingly and effectively and appropriately. That's a dangerous person. And having that background, that temperament is really important. And and I wonder if, with a lot of people, why they don't get to that third part. Because it's one thing being good at violence, but to be good at violence, you also have to be good at not being violent, and that is a skill set a lot of people don't learn for whatever reason. And I find, and like Marquise and I talked about this in our podcast, is that like, for one, not being white men and not growing up in a more affluent society is like code switching is a big deal, projection is a big deal, purposeful presentation is a big deal. So how to mitigate the potentiality of violence to everybody else, let alone yourself, is a skill set that we've all had to develop because of those circumstances. And so I don't know, it's curious.
Yeah, and it's one where you talk about the why changing as people go through their process, and it's one where I just had a student, young guy, one of our younger students in the older class, like he just graduated to the older class, like 2 months ago, and he was about to move up in rank, and we were, his grandfather was telling me how much the learning all of this had helped him, because he was getting last year. He was getting bullied really bad in school. He would he hated going to school. He would cry going to school. And, he got kind of, he'd been learning with us for about a year. And, he got to a point where a bully tried to confront him, and said something. And he just we've been working on sitting into your punches and sitting into your stances, not for looking cool for the form judges. I don't care about that. I care about you having a solid base, and when you hit something, things are going to move. And so, the kid was messing with him and trying to push him, and he just hit a block hard and hit the stance right that we were working on, and the kid got scared and left him alone. Yeah. And he was that was a massive game changer for that kid, because he had a confidence in what he was learning, but also in I can actually take care of myself now, instead of worrying about what's going to happen. I just got to take it. And that's just a huge, win to me for him, because, that just changed his trajectory of how he walks around every day, how his head is held. And I mean, that's the reason, one of the reasons why I do it is, I could care less about my own famousness or whatnot. If anything, I try to keep my head down more than I try to promote it. Seeing students have situations like that where they're I had things called into question and it didn't fail me, or I feel better about myself from what I know I can do, even though I don't necessarily have to do it all the time, or should run around challenge fighting people, but just that inner kind of fortitude that you get from it, is just really helpful in a lot of ways. So
I mean, it's that confidence through capability versus confidence as a currency, because your currency is violence. And I think that distinction is really important, because you run the risk of, being a martial artist who's skillful, who has experience, who's capable and willing. One could say that's a superpower in a lot of ways, to go with our nerdy route, because being capable of violence and willing to use it and not willing to use it, that's true control. To use Dune, as I often do, is to destroy things, to have absolute control over it.
Yeah.
But that goes the other way as well, because you run this issue where somebody has all this control, has this capability, all this experience, but they flip the switch and they like to do it, and they're malicious. And that's where it's a tricky spot to play in, because in my case, when I was in the deep of all my nonsense as a teenager, I had the skill, experience, and desire, and I liked hitting people, I liked hurting people, I liked being it, because violence was a currency for a good portion of my life, and it took a long time for me to get out of that, and I wonder how many other people have that situation, and they're probably getting out of that.
Well, it's one thing, especially when you have that that particular trait modeled, and the currency, there's value in being able to do that for survival and protection, and even your betterment in that particular environment. It's doing productive things for you. It might not be necessarily the morally right thing, but it's doing things that are working positively for you, is giving you a return of some sort, and it's really hard to get out of that dopamine cycle of if it's working, why do something else? When other things have bigger barriers or roadblocks, and so that really kind of changing that mentality of there's other ways to do it, but at the same time, you kind of they say you can take the person out of the hood, but you don't take the hood out of the person. So I was telling my wife, where I'm just man, when we get to school this year, and we take our kid to there for the first IEP meeting, because my kid's autistic as well and is non-speaking, and I said, I'm just I can already tell in myself, if they do something out of pocket, I'm gonna have a hard time releasing the inner Sam Jackson. So I need you to make sure that I don't do that, because you'll see the signs before it happens. And she's like, oh, I know, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting thing of, so like my wife and my dynamic is kind of very similar of like, pull it back, flip your hat around, don't flip it backwards, because when it goes that way, then we have issues. So like,
Yeah.
chill the fuck out kind of mentality. And
Yeah.
it's funny when your spouse picks up on those cues, because when they know you so well, and that
Yeah.
ends up being that protective dynamic as a couple, because as much as a protector we have to be skillful, capable, willing, and experienced to do so, the other part about it is we have to teach and condition our partners how to do so as well. And part of that is conditioning them or educating them of saying, hey, here's the signs when I'm starting to hit that level, pull me back, prevent me from there, don't egg it up, pull me back. And it's a skill that I don't know if a lot of people actually train it, let alone if it's something that they actively think about.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing with conflict avoidance, but also like that people management part is a really big thing, because I mean I've between security and working mental health and just life, I mean I've de-escalated a lot of situations. Some peacefully, some violently, and I would say the amount that were violent were, I would say, lower, because the verbal part and all the other emotional intelligence stuff that you do, kind of managing that, going in with a mindset of like, the fight that's avoided is the fight best won, this kind of thing. And also just a lot of situations where, violence was a possibility. Datu Kelly always says, like, you're not just fighting the person in front of you, but there's their buddies, and then there's the cheerleaders and witnesses. Yeah. And like, I've personally been in that, where like you started out with one person, that one turned to two, and then
the homies
next thing you know, there's a riot. I remember there was one, like, this was early in my security career. I'll never forget it. It was the Shorty Low concert. And it was just funny because, like, we bring in like people like him and Royce the 5'9" and a few other, Lil Wayne came in for a little 500 bike race that year. There's a funny story behind that, but that happened at our club. But this particular concert, this dude came on, I want to say around 2 a.m. or 2:15, and he was the headliner. Club's only open till 3, and we shut down around 2:50. So everybody was mad to start out with, and then he goes on, and it's just a wreck of a place, because everybody's like ready to pop off, and we had a lot of people come down from Indy for the show, because I mean, he's not like a big name, but he's someone people know, and it was funny because the same thing happened with Gorilla Joe, but Gorilla Joe was fun. He was like enjoying himself, but yeah, this one was one where they just, like, it was just the wrong mix of people at the wrong time, and the main act just didn't really deliver. And so kind of right at the end of the night, that like 2:30 time period, like literally the concert was going for like a handful of minutes, and then just stuff started popping off like between two people. And because it was so densely packed that night, and it's dark and everything in the back, where the stage was and the pit was, it was literally like two people start to break up a fight, because I was on the outside of the rim guarding a door, and then there was the main people, and there were the guys who were kind of patrolling, and then there was the guys in VIP, and then there were the guys on the door up front. And I'm sitting there watching this, where it's just like, okay, like, fight, but we got a couple of our guys in there going to watch to make sure they don't need support immediately, but like we've got enough of a ratio to like they can handle it while I watch the door, because I'm having enough problems on the door already the way the night was going, keeping people from either coming in or coming out. And then it just this just escalated. Like, I have no other way of describing it other than just watching it go from a couple people to a riot in a matter of like 2 minutes.
Well, you can feel it. It's
you can feel that you can feel where it went from, and we had like 700 people in there that night. So it was freaking wild. And it was one where, like, I think it was just so funny, because I remember I was probably a blue belt in Hapkido at this point, and we just really had started getting into stick defense more like concertedly, and like the fundamentals of that. And I mean, people were throwing stools and tables, and I mean, we had some big boys in there who were like picking up a bar table and like swinging it like it was a club. And I'm just like, I remember I had one guy that, tried to, swing a stool at me. And I mean, I was able to get rid of it and then strip the stool from him. And I mean, literally, our thing at one point was, other than getting our guys out who were in the middle that like we saw get hurt from getting hit with stools. One guy got a dislocated shoulder, another guy got a dislocated knee, from getting cracked with the stool. We were like taking stools and tables from people, tossing them outside of the ball of people, trying to get to our people on the inside. The cops came in with guns out because it was a freaking riot. So like, they were like, all the lights are on, and when the lights come on, people know like things have gone, south. And so like the BPD came in like ready to throw down. And I mean, it was just like, at the end, it was like, our strategy of security was like, get to the guys who were getting killed. And like, because like everybody's fighting, so it's not going to be like break up the fight. It's like, make sure these guys don't die. And so
spreading, isolate.
Yeah, and like the cops would handle the outside dissipation. And so like in the end, it was just like the handful of us in the center, like protecting our guys, and then the cops took care of the rest. And I mean, that was just an unforgettable experience. So that was one where like when people talk about like, movement with weapon defense, I'm just like, if you have like steel thrown at you, or like, 2x4 or whatever it is, like, people will pick up out of the random. I mean, I remember after that night, we made a rule where we're like, after that incident, we no longer kept furniture in during rap concerts. We put all of the pick up possible furniture. We bike locked it to this one thing outside the bar. And like, that was just the thing from then on, because we're just like, we're not going through that again. So
you got to prep the field to fight at your advantage. Yeah. It's so interesting. Like the pre-indicators of violence, the pre-fight indicators, like you can feel that electrical, visceral, emotional discharge with people before some shit's going to pop off.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And like being empathetic and being emotionally aware that's a soft skill people don't think about. And it's something that like people find a little woohooey, but the fact is the fear response, that using fear as a extra sense to prepare for violence or prepare for the exit from violence, like that's a skill that people need to hone in. And like the buzzword, of course, is situational awareness. From the behavioral health, mental health side, I mean, that's emotional awareness. That's
and especially people who've gone through trauma really have that dialed in, because I mean, I saw it with my son when we picked him up from Bulgaria. He was saying goodbye to the workers in the orphanage, and I mean, Bulgarian orphanages are rough places, and especially someone with a disability, they're extremely rough. And we kind of knew who the nicer people versus the not nice people were from our interactions prior, but like there were two people who were nice to him that like when they went to hug him goodbye, he was like, okay, cool, like you were nice to me. And then everybody else who tried to say goodbye to him, he just like stiffened up, like don't touch me sort of thing. And I mean, it was just, he was 5 at this point, and it's like he's already got that sense in him. So I mean, I get it. I mean, my wife and I have our own like trauma histories where like, we're very violence avoidant by nature. Not afraid to use it, but like also like that's not something we naturally gravitate towards because of our own histories and what we went through. And so it's like
you're aware of it. You're aware of it.
We're aware of the impact of it. Like once you do certain things, there's kind of a I don't want to say irreparable damage, but it leaves an imprint on people. And I mean, even when I was working security, like I mean, I remember the vast majority of us carried, to and from the bar. We couldn't carry on duty, but we carried, while we were, moving to our cars and that. And we usually went in packs to wherever we were parked. Never rolled single. And that was because we usually get people who throw them out, and then they'd be like, if I see you in the street, or better yet, like we throw them out, and it didn't matter what time of night it was. Sometimes we throw them out, and they would literally wait till close for like us to come out the front door. We always went out the back door and went like 6 deep. So it's like, if you're waiting for us at the back door, good luck. But the front door, they'd be like, I'm waiting for that guy to, come out and finish the job. And, it was just, I remember like times where I was guarding, throwing somebody out, or somebody else got thrown out, and I'd be standing over there was like a ramp and a railing, and then there was the second door. And I remember there was one dude threw out, he was fine, left, and then I'm standing there guarding, carding IDs, and the next thing I know, I feel this like I don't want to say force, but like this like grip trying to pull me over the railing, and he is lucky that the guard on the next door pulled him away, because he was about to catch the hardest elbow, like, from that, because there's one where I'm just like, oh, this guy's trying to pull me over this like steep thing, like, he's meaning business, so like, I'm meaning it back immediately, and he luckily got pulled away out of the purview of that range. But it's one where, again, you're in those situations, like, it's kind of like just the, you got to handle what you handle, but you're also like, trying to be very aware of like, what the environment is, and just, again, that emotional intelligence. Because some people, like I said, that guy came out fine. He was kind of like just sort of stuporish drunk. And then once he had time to stew on it for a sec, decided he was going to be pissed about it and then come back and retaliate. And, we had other people, like I remember we threw out these two brothers once who, it was funny. They got into a argument between themselves, and then their wives and girlfriends jumped in, and we saw them shove their wives and girlfriends away. So we were like, okay, you're out. We chucked them out. One brother was fine. He was okay. He was like, yeah, we did wrong. We shouldn't have done that. Other brother had PTSD from the war. We find out this after we throw him out, and he's like, he was in the war. You don't understand. And I'm just like, oh shit. Like, like we're going to be in for one. And I mean, we were in a freaking melee for about 10 minutes before the cops showed up, because, the brother who was like, flashing back to Iraq was just fighting for his life. And, we just had to literally put him down on the ground and hold him there. And other brother kept ping-ponging off the outside trying to help him out, but like, wasn't really invested. So he actually got the worst between the two of us, because one dude, we're like, you're not getting up. We're not letting you up until you're in handcuffs. The other guy would like pop in for a second, get dropped, think about it for a second, pop back in, get dropped, and then like after about 3 times, he's like, all right, I'm done. And the cops show up and they're like, how did he get all screwed up? I'm like, well, I kept
coming back.
I didn't hit him there. I mean, I didn't say I didn't hit him, but I'm like, I didn't hit him there. Like that was his own doing. I'm like, what happened? I'm like, well, we were holding him on the ground. And he cheese grated his face against the asphalt, and like that was on him. Like we told him to just like quit resisting and like chill, and he wouldn't. And it's like, yeah, ground fighting on concrete, is a whole different game. So
yeah, it is.
It's like one where I'm just like, I left with bloody arms, but he had a jacked up face, and it was one where it's like, that's the reality of some of that stuff. So
yeah,
throws can be dang lethal on concrete. So
that they can. You're hitting somebody with a planet. So talking about emotional intelligence, because like a buzzword right now is trauma-informed education when it comes to training martial arts. Now, what I'm curious about as a professional in the behavioral health, mental health community, how does that inform your training and teaching about situational awareness, emotional awareness, and like the different elements of de-escalation with violence?
Yeah, so with that, a couple of things come to mind, and I kind of look at it from 2 perspectives. Am I looking at it from the perspective of someone who's been through a lot of trauma and in a situation called to get out of the, like some people are just natural fight or flight response. But a lot of people who've been through a lot of traumatic stuff, especially what I've seen more is you get, the people who have that fight response generally have issues with aggression in other places. Not just with the trauma, but like with like some other things, either regarding communication or being understood, or just it's a currency in a way. It's meeting a need that is not being met somewhere else, or it's efficient at doing what it's intending to do, and it's trying to make other things more functional than like teeing off. As where usually my bigger, because usually in that case, like it's getting somebody out of that like kind of automatic, like, okay, we got to throw down to protect ourselves or protect our people around us. Not that you shouldn't protect people or protect yourself, but like going to that overly aroused state too quickly. As where I see typically the trauma part hit more, that takes a little more work, is the people who've been through some form of abuse, or even maybe not they've been through it, but like they have a reaction to particular environments. And when I say environments, I mean like certain positions or scenarios that just trigger a a response in them that is where you see the freeze or fawn or kind of response where it's either like they try to make nice and like go along, or they just shut down and freeze. And I've seen that with people who are have been through stuff, and it's kind of getting them to learn how to find their voice in a way to where it's like you moving forward and protecting yourself and taking action is breaking the cycle of it just kind of happening. And it's not victim blaming at all, but it's one where kind of like there's this especially for people who've been under a lot of repeated abuse where there's a big power differential, that kind of idea of like, if I do something, this bad consequence is going to happen, or I'm going to lose this relationship, or I'm going to lose this bit of safety, or like worse is going to come back at me. And one of the biggest things with trauma is like, there's this past scenario, situation, stimulus that a current situation is evoking that past emotion, and it's separating the timeline between those two events. Like, yes, something might be similar or might be the exact same thing and how it's happening, but like you're not the 6-year-old that was getting abused in that moment.
But your brain just doesn't.
Your brain doesn't differentiate that. So it's kind of, there's a lot of rewiring that has to happen, and a lot of differentiation that occurs. But also again, too, like someone froze as part of a survival instinct. It's one where maybe that might not have been good for them, but it might have been effective in preserving their safety in that particular moment. And so, or at least like thought so. And so it's one where, kind of being able to reframe things in a way where like using these tools is a way to better assure freedom from similar situations. And also it's the two, I think, sometimes people worry about like, well, if I get to this point, or if I do this, am I going to become like the abuser that, did things to me? Or am I going to, is it going to repeat the cycle? And so there's just a lot of things, I think, cognitively and emotionally that need to be, kind of assured and worked through. And it takes time, and different people's process is different as far as what that timeline looks like, and how much it occurs to like their effective ends. But it's one where that does take a lot of work, and takes a lot of sensitivity too, because it's one where you have students that don't have that background, and so they don't see why when we do perfect example. I had one time we were doing ground self-defense with in Hapkido, and we were working from like a escape from mount position. And I had someone working with their significant other, and even though they had someone they knew, very familiar with, very safe with, as soon as they got in that position, they just like shut down. And like, needed a minute. And it's one where that was a big thing. It was a big realization for them that they didn't even know they were going to have that reaction until they got into that spot. But once they knew that, kind of what we did was working from a position of safety, and again differentiation from like the perceived threat, and then building confidence in working through similar positions, not just throwing them in it and submersing in it and trying to desensitize, because that's just kind of unethical in some ways, but really kind of working with them on like, okay, like how can we help you, here are ways I can help you use this to understand it better, so you feel confident, and once you get there, you can get out of it. So there's some part of it that's confidence building and being able to break out of those particular scenarios where, like in the previous situation, there might have been like a certain amount of powerlessness or power differential that made it impossible or extremely difficult. But it's like with the new tools in the toolbox, there's elements that can help you feel more assured. It's not 100% protect all, but it's one where it's like, it can be a difference between putting up a good fight and trying versus it just kind of happening again, without any resources, which would just be, awful. It's one where, that would be, one where it's like, again, we didn't do our job in helping the person, work through that. And, giving them tools to where, again, not where we felt confident, because someone can be technically correct, but they might not be internally confident in what they're doing. And so they might get in that situation and they don't have the grounding to be able to execute. And so it's really kind of helping people learn to be grounded in those difficult states, and make a fun, tactical reference, kind of shorten the OODA loop and, make a decision and act and decisively act. So, once that became a thing, I remember like a couple of years later, we were doing just some ground sparring, and they were like, "Oh, that was fun." And they're like, "I couldn't have done that like 3 years ago." But like, we worked with it on their level at the speed they were able to take it in, not pushing anything they weren't ready for, but also like, mildly challenging them to kind of take steps as they were, feeling, emotionally safe enough to do it, and doing it in a way that took the immediate stress response out. So when we did things that were more stress inoculation type, drills, it wasn't the, immediate danger feel, but they could train with the intent like they were getting out of stuff. So, that kind of helped in that scenario. And I mean, I see the same thing sometimes with striking too, where people might look like a boss on the pads, and then you get them into where they can get hit in the face, and all of a sudden their world changes. And it's just one where that's it's just kind of, I'm trying to think of how to say this is, I want to say tactfully, but as sensitively as possible. Like when things are going bad, there's a certain amount of, when you talk about like, people who use violence as currency and people are used to growing up in violence, we're okay with not being okay to a certain extent, because we've seen it enough to a point where it doesn't elicit we're in more of a, what do we need to do to preserve ourselves in this situation because of what we've observed and been through. Where someone who's maybe not had that experience, or not been in a situation where they've had power in the situation to aggress from those scenarios, don't have that, the connections neurally to do that aren't there as much. And so it's building those connections of like, okay, yes, you're going to get tunnel vision, yes, things are going to shrink, yes, you're going to go to instincts, but like to a certain level, with training and with other kind of experience, you are able to make a few different cognitive decisions in spite of emotions, rather than the emotions just kind of flooding over and going, what do I do? And I mean, that's the same thing in mental health, where it's like you're building coping skills, where I'm not telling people they're never going to fall again or never feel depressed, because I'll tell people in session 1 where it's like, high chance you will go through a lot of things that brought you in here again at some point. Not that you're going to go through the same situation, but like life just has its stressors and ebbs and flows. But like, we're not here to fix, we're here to facilitate. And when I facilitate, it's, gaining insight and exploring, kind of some things in the past and some things about the current, setting, to help you figure out what are the modalities and tools that click with you, both your own self kind of inner strengths that you have, and then also acquiring new skills that might be, some might be natural, some might feel a little bit more outside of the natural leaning. But sometimes you got to take a hard thinker and put them in an emotional spot. And sometimes you got to take someone who's really emotional and put them in a very logical spot. And sometimes it's a mix of both. And, just there's all kinds of, ebbs and flows and tracks to do that. But it's one where, you're facilitating a process to help that when the person encounters a similar situation in the future, they don't fall as hard and they can recover faster. And so that's usually my big thing. I tell people, in mental health, it's like, we're going off of your goals. It's your process, not mine. Again, I'm finding their why from the get-go, and I do the same thing with my martial arts students. Like, what brought you in? Why are you here? Because I'm going to train a person who's just there for the sport. I'm going to make sure their fundamentals are good, but I'm going to train someone who's just in there for getting exercise, different than the person who's like, I don't want to ever go through a sexual assault again, or I want to be able to protect my family, or I want to be an instructor to pass this stuff on. You're going to, yes, you want to treat your students as economically and equivocally as possible, but you are going to train people with different attributes and different intent differently, because it's only fair to them, because that's, if someone's coming to me asking for a service to pay them to do a certain thing, and I give them a different thing, they're not getting what they paid for. It's not the transaction they're looking for. And I mean, I can still give someone solid self-defense who just wants to get good movement and lose weight, and I can still help someone who's an instructor who just wants to teach and pass it on, know some of those other points of like, well, if you want to, compete and throw down, like, here's how you do it. And, they all build on each other. And so it's just, kind of back to something, Datu Kelly says, is you're connecting systems, you're connecting ideas, and you're bridging modalities to the needs of your particular individual within, depending on what art, a certain structured framework or curriculum, that those foundations give them a jumping point to apply it how they need to apply it.
Yep, you got to contextualize it, because the big thing that we run into within the personal protection self-defense dynamic is personal protection is a preparatory preventative situation. You're in control. You have the locus of control, and you are not in a trauma state. Self-defense is reactionary. It's after the fact, and you're already at that deficit because you have to go through. A lot of people have to go through that trauma. Typically, when you're dealing with a self-defense client, like a women's self-defense course, is you have to process through their trauma of actually having gone through a extreme amount of violence, sexual violence, and just through that in general. And so that part is really hard as an instructor. And as an instructor if an instructor does not have that emotional awareness, let alone that education, it makes things even worse, because you risk the potential of re-traumatizing them and creating a bigger problem.
Yeah, because I was just admonishing encouraging, but like, talking to a student who came up under some more like kind of militaristic instructors who were the old school drill sergeant, kind of guys. And I'm just like, look, like, I know that's what you came up under, but like, since I've taken over, that is not the culture we have here. And you have to be mindful of your audience, because like, you've got kids here, they were used to other guys their age who were in it to bang, and like, they weren't treated well by their instructors. They got awesome knowledge, but they weren't treated well by the people who taught them.
It's that cycle of abuse.
And so it's like, I when I took over, I'm like, this isn't going to be a thing anymore, because it was driving people away, and I'm just like, this isn't valuable. This isn't what people are coming in here for, and especially if I'm trying to build people up, that's going to just tear them down. And especially with I've got several students that are neurodiverse, and I've got people who have dealt with their own trauma and other things like that, and it's just like, that is really not going to fly with them, because you're going to get people either fighting you or freezing you. So it's one where that's just you got to know your audience, and there's just a way of giving the same stuff, but just you got to package it a little differently in your delivery, but you're still giving the same strategy and tactics, because the art's the art, but how you present it and how you go about training it with a certain intent is going to impact how people take it on. And just even your personality and how you're delivering it is going to really impact that, because if people are getting a funky energy from you, they're going to be dismissive towards you or feel unsafe around what you're doing, and it's going to hinder their learning.
Because I mean, teaching in of itself is its own skill set. It's its own art, and like a master,
it is.
A master instructor is not only like a master at their knowledge base, their curriculum, and conveying it in such a manner that students can actually apply it and make it their own and teach it. But a master instructor is also somebody who can tailor that curriculum per each student, but still give everybody the same data, but parse it and package it a different way for each, so everybody can grow in that space and get all that same information. So, and when you have like a single data point of like the drill sergeant approach, that's such a very basic level of education. Like in my own case of being a non-commissioned officer in the Army, is you see like the tyrants, you see. And that's their primary skill set, because that's their experience. And you go up as you have more experience in leadership roles, and you're able to tailor because of that experience. And part of it just comes from, one, more education, two, a willingness to actually do better and take on that work, and three, I mean, time helps. So
yeah, definitely. And I mean, especially with FMA too, it's one where you see, I think you've been to camp and you see how, you've got world-class people who are acting like just they're everybody else off the street. And when they present, they're presenting from a very down-to-earth, effective communicator element. And I've been to the FMA seminars where it's like, I'm going to grind you into the dirt and, kind of, run you through your courses. And I've been to ones that are everything in between from there, and it's just one where just I think again knowing your audience, why are people there? Are people there to get just the effectiveness of the communication to your audience, and again what I said earlier is like, are they leaving with something that they can use? Because I mean, no one's going to remember everything from the seminar.
No.
I'm a huge transcriber, even for my own study and like things that I go to. Like I always take lots of notes, just because like I'm a very visual person, but like usually when I have to internalize things, video is great. And I usually replay stuff, but I will, even just for my own things that I already know in my brain hard, I will write extensive detail on what's going on just so that way I can internalize it, because that's just how my brain processes. If I just see it, some things, if I have enough to connect it to, I can make connections to, but like, usually it's like, okay, I've got to like do it this way to make sure it sticks. And, this one where, the things I've noticed when it comes to what stuck the best is who could communicate in a way where there were certain either levels of emotional content, acronyms that were easily internalized, idioms that worked really well, things that were, again, how working memory works is, 5 to 7 words within 5 to 7 seconds is most likely to stick. And then anything beyond that, you're starting to get into, how well is your processing speed. So, keeping it short, concise, delivering enough detail, but, telling enough to do it, but not like over explaining, which is my fault. I tend to over talk, things because I want to make sure people understand it as thoroughly as, they can. And, some people receive that really well. And some people are like, dude, you're doing it. I'm like, sorry. So, but
Fortunately for a long form podcast, that works great.
Yeah. No, I again, I joke that I get to do teaching as a socially acceptable way of intro dumping, on special interests. Someone's paying you to do it, so that's one where with that you try to think, how can someone leave with a repeatable mnemonic or device, and not just something that, oh, this is catchy and cool, but like, okay, does it actually work? Can I ask this question 3 weeks from now and everybody tell me the same thing or close to it? Can they get the concept underneath it? And, those are always points of development. So, it's part of communication, part of, kind of just knowing your people's backgrounds. If I know someone's a Boy Scout, I might tell them Boy Scout things. If I know someone's a, other insert of their background here, or I know like they train something else, like I'm always trying to make connections to what's familiar with them, so they don't have to relearn. They can just transform their knowledge there.
Yeah, it's an association and matching up and utilizing your language to apply it to what you already know. And again, underneath the spirit of NSI and Datu Kelly's teachings is you got to connect the systems, but you have to have the breadth of experience of those different systems and your own voice to figure out like, oh, that's what this is. And that's what that is. I can make it this thing because I understand in context what they are. And that part of it is being somebody who is visually knowledgeable or who's knowledgeable enough to actually recognize the movement and have the experience to apply it. So, I mean, and that comes from having a diverse experience. And when I'm finding, I mean, there is martial arts and just people in general have like a singular thing that they are masters at that. And that's awesome. And that's great for them. But you got everybody else who's like, they pick and choose because life just does that to them. So they come in and out of things and trying to figure out what is what. They have to make associations and connections between those and contextualize it and figure out like, oh, it's human movement. We're just doing this because of this language cue.
Yeah. And it's one where, especially with all those cues and things like that, you've got, just, again, is it repeatable? Is it something that you can work with? And just that breadth of experience is another thing because, I'll tell students who've only done one art, I have a couple students who've done, we're doing like 2 with me, we might be doing like, Taekwondo and kickboxing, and like I'm like, there are more similarities than differences if you look at the fundamentals, even though they are very different arts in a lot of ways. They're also very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it's like, instead of looking at the differences, look at the similarities, because you can hone your fundamentals between both and those similarities, and then figure out why they're different and what are they trying to do by that difference. Because, I'll tell, the people that study, 1 or 2 or 3, under me, where I'm just like, look, like, you learn one art, you've got an idea. You learn 2 arts, you're confused. You learn 3 arts, then you start to understand. So,
and you just got to keep playing and figuring it out.
Yeah.
And that's the part about that self-advocacy of finding your own voice of, what is this? How do I make my body apply to what this is? Because then that's that part about mastery. Mastery is figuring it out over time and making it work for you. It's that whole make it your own. So,
right.
So, James, this has been a great conversation about education. And actually, like, one of the things that I find interesting about this podcast is when I'm able to talk to people who have other fields of study in education and trying to apply it to teaching modalities is fascinating, because a lot of, again, we were talking about like single data points. When you only have, you were raised up in the dojo, this is the way my instructor did it, and so on and so forth, you're limited. But when you have a person who actually has other skill sets professionally and educationally to draw from, to inform their martial art and actually improve upon it, that's a rare treat. And I'm really glad we actually got to dive into that, because the general story of like, this is who I am, this is what my martial arts daddy did, here's the story. I mean, that's great, but like actually learning some stuff, that's what actually I'm here for. Aside from I get to hang out with a cool friend. So
yeah. Now, me and Kelly have joked over the years where I'm like, we'll talk about like, stuff going on, or people and pulling rank, or being, egotistic, and like I'm like, Datu, your certificate doesn't fight for you. Like, I don't care who signed it and what's been on it. Like, paper doesn't do anything for you other than like add someone else's legitimacy to you. You make the certificate. And I tell my black belts, I'm like, you're a black belt. Like, I don't want you to have one, because like I could go buy one for $5 from Century and give you something. It doesn't mean anything, but like, I want you to be that individual that carries that weight of the knowledge and the application, not just collecting techniques, but be a master of application, to quote Kelly again.
You know, like buying this kind of black belt?
Yeah. Where it's just like, that's cool, ain't gonna fight for you. So, it's one where, just having that mindset is just a different thing. And it's just one where, especially, just even having the freedom, as you're talking about, to develop kind of your own ideas and thoughts on things. And, it's like, we might be doing the same art. We might not necessarily agree on everything, but that's where our personal application comes in. But we might agree on the fundamentals. And, part of it could be just how we're built physically, or, our experience, or just ways we've used it. And, it's always sad to me is when, sometimes I'll play with some other people, and, they'll be like, like, hey, like, what about this? Or like, hey, do you ever consider this? And they're like, oh, I got to talk to, so-and-so higher rank about that. Or let me ask them about that. I'm just
go do it.
Freaking do it. Like, do you got to ask them to wipe yourself every time you go to the bathroom when like someone changes the brand of toilet paper? Like, come on. But like, it's just one where it's like, just having that, having the collective mind to understand the kind of the overall feel of what the art does, but then having the individual mind to be like, how's my own expression coming out for my use of it, but then being able to generalize enough to where, like, if I have to pass this on to someone else, how can I give them those foundations, but also help them expound on their attribute and, kind of knowledge that they're bringing to the table to apply it. And, with FMA, like, there's so much, I mean, so many of the systems are so big. They're so big compared to the empty hand systems. Like, I'll tell my TKD people, where I'm like, TKD ain't that big of a system comparatively to,
especially
like,
when you just Taegooks and
when you're doing when you're thinking about doing FMA as like a multimodal, multiplanar, movement with something that's an extension of you before you get to the empty hand, or as part of the empty hand, or different lengths and different swords are used for different systems for different reasons. It gets you to think so differently about your use and your application, and it just changes your your style. And I mean, especially if you get to play with people of different, lineages and different, backgrounds, it just expands it even more. So, it's always, I tell my guys, like, go train with as many different people as you can, even if you don't like them, train with them, because you'll see what other people are doing. And it'll either be like, oh, hey, that's cool. Maybe I can take something for that. Or, oh, hey, here's might be something not to do that doesn't gel with me. Or maybe here's one way someone used it that you're like, hey, I can adapt this way for my needs and, make it my own, as Remy Priest would say. So, that's all a big part of it.
I mean, a lot of it is to grow is to experience, because of the summation of all things, you are your experiences. So go experience it all because you can. You don't need the permission from whomever, whatever. Just go do the damn thing and have fun.
Yeah.
Be the rebellious self in their 20s who left home and go do martial arts.
Yeah, especially like, I mean, we're, kids is one thing, but as adults, it's like, if you're like, in your, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, like, who's going to tell you what you can and can't learn?
Right.
If you need somebody, if somebody's got that kind of control over you, that's a whole nother can of worms. So
we give power to whom and what we will. Yes. And it's so interesting that within the martial arts community, there is such this power dynamic of surrendering our free will and sovereignty to some dude in pajamas, which is and especially in an American culture where liberty and individual sovereignty and free agency is a core fundamental belief.
So we drank the Kool-Aid hard when it came to that stuff, just as a culture. And I mean, that doesn't jive with me, but it's one where, it's just funny how that's what it evolved from in some ways, but it's just, people, sometimes the grass is greener on the way somebody else does it. And, confidence sometimes just attracts people, whether or not it's founded. So,
yeah, it's interesting. But my friend,
there's a good sign I saw at a bar once where it said, bluffing, a pair of balls can beat anything. So, kind of, just the, again, that's where, can be all that stuff. But anyway, I'll stop talking. I can keep
no worries. I have to cut it short because I got a kid who is
I understand,
giving me the hungry eyes of like, feed me, Dad.
So. Oh yeah, feed them before they go do things. So yeah.
Well, James, I really appreciate you spending the time and actually sharing the gift of your time to steal one from Jeff John's guard, and just sharing the wealth of your knowledge. Because again, having conversations of just martial arts, that's great and all, but actually having an intellectual conversation about modalities and pedagogy, matching it to dealing with mental health and behavioral health, that's what I'm here for, because that side of it fascinates me. So
it's all related. It's all very related, and it's like I said, I like to keep my head down to a certain extent because I just want to avoid all the drama and politics, but I also want to give an avenue to share what's in there and just ideas, and whether it's like, hey, what do you think about this? Is it suck or not? Or like, hey, this is an idea I'm playing with, or hey, here's a different perspective, and you kind of see what happens. So
yeah, well, definitely you're more than welcome. Yeah, this is all open invite to ever come back on here whenever you want, when you have something to go off on, because that's what I'm here for. I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. It's much appreciated, and it's a lot of fun. So
sweet. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you at camp this year.
Yeah, so definitely. We'll be there.
Yeah, brother.
All right.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to drop you down. And
okay.
Let's see.
All right. Bye.
Later. I learned so much from these podcasts, and it's a very guilty pleasure of mine, because as much as I get to put out content, really this is for me to actually talk to cool people and learn some very interesting stuff. So that's what I did today. Anyways, no real long outro. Anyways, I'm just gonna go bye. See ya.